Hello there and welcome to Here and Now on NTV. I'm Janet Mbugua. We're filming at the Fairview Hotel. Now, at a time when more and more young people are being told to take a seat at the table, plug into opportunities, this show we're going to have 4 women who are actually creating some of these seats and inviting young people to join. We're going to be talking about young women who are influencing policy in the country. First up is a conversation with Lizz Ntonjira.
For the longest that I can remember, I have been the youngest in a room put together with certain cadres of people. Currently where I work, I'm the youngest in the senior leadership team, and that has applied in the various capacities that I've held since I left media. And it has been an amazing journey, but not short of its own challenges. And the most constant and consistent and most frequent question I get asked is, how and why did you leave media? And I kid you not, if I had $1 for every time I've been asked that question, I'd be very rich. But for me, when I was in the 4th estate, our basic role was holding the people in power accountable for their decisions, accountable for their actions, and accountable for what was happening either in the economy or in the different factions in the industry. However, I needed to understand better, what does accountability mean? And that's why for me, I felt I needed to step back and do my master's in public policy and management, and at the same time join the public sector and really understand how it runs. And trust me, it's like a science. And I learned so much. A lot of the things that are done in the public policy space are done for the public good and for public interest. Over the years and doing this course, I have really understand what it takes to run the public sector. It's about putting the public good first, the public interest first, and it was really eye-opening now putting to play some of the things that are reported. When we're talking about the Public Finance Management Bill, what are we talking about? How is the Auditor General, for instance, held into account? In the policy space, I would say I'm an advocate. I'm a strong advocate for the youth, for policies that are pro-youth. And over the years, even while transitioning from media to the public policy and communication space, I have learned that age discrimination is a reality. I live in a country where the median age is 19 years old with a life expectancy of 64 years. All our cabinet secretaries are over 50 years old. And when we talk about youth policies, it really strikes me as ironical because we always talk about creating opportunities for young people, but we need to stop talking and start acting. I am tired of hearing, young people are the future leaders of tomorrow. We're not the future leaders of tomorrow. We are the future leaders of today. And that needs to be recognized. It needs to be implemented and acted upon. And I'm not talking about something that is new. It has actually happened in other different countries. Mali, for instance, recently appointed their youngest minister for foreign affairs, who's only 35 years old, called Kamisa Kamara. In Zimbabwe, they just elected their youngest youth and sports minister, who's called Miss Coventry, who actually won a gold medal for the country and has been involved in the Olympics Federation, and it made sense for her to be elected as the youth minister, youth and sports minister. In Sierra Leone, appointed their youngest chief innovation officer for the country, David Senge. I've had the pleasure and opportunity to work with Senge in my previous capacity, and he's a brilliant guy. But he's not just alone. There are so many brilliant young people out there that we don't leverage on this demographic dividend. New Zealand had their first ever youngest prime minister at only 37 years old. And finally, what I would say is young people need to be given a seat at the table And if we're not given this seat at the table, we need to demand for that seat at the table. And that's why creating platforms that are geared towards youth empowerment is really critical for me as a youth in policy, advocating for youth policies.
So you've talked passionately about, wanting to see young people to be mainstreamed when it comes to policy, public policy. Maybe very briefly, somebody could be watching, they're young, they hear this word thrown around a lot. What is policy? Who is a policymaker?
Great. So policy is a whole entire process of how policies come into being, the formulation process, the decision-making processes, how these things are implemented. So sometimes some policies take long because it means we have to change the law, and we have legislators to do that. So it's not a process that really takes a short time. Sometimes it's over the years. Yeah. So, but they're low-hanging fruits of things that we can immediately change. Policy makers are those we entrust to drive the policy change and influence it and advocate for it. And most importantly, which lacks in this country and many African governments, is the enforcement and implementation of these policies. We have brilliant policies, but they just sit in cabinets and nobody's implementing them. That's the most unfortunate bit.
That is, and that's where somebody like you comes in, in the advocacy space and trying to get that to happen. How much more do you think we can engage, and for this particular segment, younger women, to be a part of influencing policy? We're not saying, and I say this is purely for this show, that we're talking about women in policy. How do you think we can engage more of them? What have you seen in terms of your experience as to whether or not there are enough women in different policy spaces?
I think we could do better. We could do much, much better in terms of having women and also men who are in the youth bracket advocating for these policy changes and being in the forefront of pushing these policies, because we are the leaders of today. We have to do this for the future generations. What I've seen is we have brilliant policies, but they just sit in cabinets. There's nobody enforcing them.
And we need to add that pressure, right? I think it takes a lot of our voices to say, hey, we need to hold you accountable to implement these policies. You've done incredible work in leadership. You continue to be, I would say you're a decorated young leader, if I can say that. Do you find that as you've grown in your role as a leader, again, do you find that there's less women at the top? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, there are definitely less women at the top, and even lesser when it comes to the age. Younger women are rarely at the top. And one thing I've come to realize, age discrimination is a reality, which is, the prejudice against people because of their age. And there are lots of fallacies and misconceptions about the youth. But I think the biggest challenge stems from the fact that there is no universal definition of who the youth is. We have some different institutions, reputable institutions, saying the youth is between 14 or 15 to 24, others is still 35. And until we can really have that universal definition, we're able to really say these are the unemployment rates across the globe or across Africa. In Africa, I believe we feel youth is between 18 to 35 because that's the working age. And the unemployment rates are skyrocketing every single day. But I feel that the unemployment rates are going high, not because these people are unemployed because of a choice. It is the governments that have made that choice, intentional choice, not to give young people an opportunity. And it's not just the government, even the private sector, even the international development sector. All these sectors have a role to play.
And you get the sense that there's a disconnect and a divide in all these sectors. I mean, what happened to like public-private partnerships? People talk about them a lot, but do we actually see them working? What's the biggest challenge that you can say you faced as somebody who's influencing policy, especially when it comes to policy that impacts the youth? What's the biggest challenge?
Being heard.
Really?
Being heard. It's really interesting. There's one time there was a fascinating report about the youth missing out at the seat on the table. And I was very happy that there's actually evidence showcasing that we are lacking in the seat of the table. And I was really excited. Then I look at the panelists, the speakers, even the moderator. There's no youth. We are just listening.
Right.
So it's just leaving out the youth. We continue perpetuating the same. And to be honest, at times it gets so redundant, because this youth conversation has been done 50 years ago. Yeah, we keep talking about the youth, but nothing is actually done. Until we see somebody proactively doing it, then we'll be happy about it. Look at Malaysia, for instance. The 93-year-old prime minister appointed a 25-year-old young man, Sayed Sadiq, as the youth minister. So we need to see that. You know, you lead by example, not just by saying.
There needs to be more mainstreaming, and I think we'll also hear that from one of our panelists. Finally, Liz, how then do we draw more people in engaging in advocacy around policy?
I think it's very important for the youth to also take a proactive role in this. We need to stop sitting and expecting things will be done for us. We need to go out there. We need to familiarize ourselves with what the Constitution says. It's actually a constitutional right for you to be involved. For instance, in your county budgeting process, there has to be public participation. Look out for those forums. How can you play a role? And sometimes we get despondent and say, but who will listen to me? Trust me, there are people listening. And we have to be proactive about it. That's the only way we can change the narrative.
Thank you so much, and it's fantastic seeing you transition, you know, from media into this amazing space of policy, and we look forward to seeing a lot of the work that you'll do.
Thank you so much.
All right, we'll take a short break on Here and Now. We'll be right back.